Imagine for a second speaking out against your government, and then boom, you're facing threats, violence, and you could even be killed.
That's a scary thought.
It's a scary thought, and it's a reality for many people in Uzbekistan.
Sadly.
Sadly so. So today we're going to take a deep dive into the world of human rights with someone who knows this region inside and out.
This is going to be fascinating.
It is, and our expert today is Maxim Kharitonov.
Now, what I find so interesting about Maxim is he's not just some academic, writing papers from afar. He's an advocate.
Yes.
Working on the front lines of asylum cases.
Right?
He's prepared over 100 expert reports for law firms in the UK and US, helping people escape persecution, build new lives in safer places.
Absolutely. We're going to focus today on a specific case where Maxim provided one of these expert reports for a major UK law firm.
Okay.
It involves a man from Uzbekistan who protested against the government's abuses.
I see.
And it's really quite chilling.
I bet.
It goes way beyond this individual's experience.
So this report, would you say it's kind of like a window into a system that silences dissent?
Yes, and it lays bare the tactics the Uzbek government uses to control its citizens, the dangers that people face when they speak out, and how hard it is to seek asylum even when you're fleeing for your life.
Oh, wow.
So let's start with the respondent's story.
Okay.
So this man is from Andishan, Uzbekistan, and his activism, it was triggered by something horrific. So several of his friends were arrested.
Yeah.
And months later, their bodies were returned to their families, and they had all the signs of severe violence.
Oh, gosh. You can imagine the impact that would have on someone.
Right. I mean, just devastating for him and the community.
Absolutely.
Just a brutal reminder of life under an authoritarian regime.
Yeah.
And it pushed him to join protests against these killings.
Makes sense.
And to document police brutality, which he witnessed firsthand.
So brave.
He started recording videos of police actions during these protests, trying to expose the truth. But this bravery, as you said, came at a high price. So in February 2022, he was detained by the police, interrogated about the protests, and forced to delete the videos.
Oh, no.
And this is where this story takes a really dark turn.
Okay.
Because Maxim's report details how he was beaten in custody.
Yeah.
A very common tactic to intimidate and silence dissenters.
Sadly.
It's not just a random act of violence.
Right.
Maxim really emphasizes this is part of a bigger pattern of repression in Uzbekistan. Protests are incredibly rare there because people are just terrified of what the government will do.
I can understand why.
Even attending a protest, you could end up in jail or worse.
Oh, wow.
The 2005 Andishan massacre, where hundreds of protesters were killed by government forces.
I've heard of that.
It casts a long shadow over any form of dissent in Uzbekistan.
Absolutely.
It's a chilling reminder
For sure.
of what can happen if you challenge the authorities.
Makes sense.
The respondent knew that he couldn't stay.
Yeah.
It just wasn't safe. So he fled to Turkey in March 2022. But even fleeing his own country didn't guarantee his safety.
Oh.
What's really unsettling is that the Uzbek government tried to get him extradited from Turkey.
Really?
Shows just how far they will go to silence critics, reaching across borders, pursuing people who speak out.
Chilling.
It is, just think about it. Even in another country, you might not be free from a repressive regime.
It's a scary thought.
It is a scary thought.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, in this case, he wasn't extradited.
Okay.
But the attempt itself just sends a chilling message.
It creates this atmosphere of fear that just goes beyond borders. Imagine the anxiety of constantly looking over your shoulder, worried that your government is trying to track you down.
Oh, gosh, even in a safe haven.
Yeah.
So he eventually made his way to the U.S.
Okay.
And she filed for asylum in March 2023. But his ordeal wasn't over.
What happened?
His family, back in Uzbekistan, became targets.
Oh, no.
The police harassed them, searching their home, issuing summonses for him.
But he wasn't even there.
I know, even though they knew he was gone.
That's awful.
This is classic transnational repression.
Yeah, it's not enough to punish dissent within their own country.
It's not.
They want to make it clear that fleeing won't protect you or your loved ones.
Right. It's about maintaining control through fear, even across borders.
It's heartbreaking to think about the impact on families.
It is.
The constant worry, the fear that speaking out could endanger your family.
It's a heavy burden.
It is. Maxim really dives deep into this concept of transnational repression.
Yeah.
He shows how it's used to control people, extend the government's power beyond its own borders.
Yeah.
A disturbing trend we're seeing all over in authoritarian regimes.
Absolutely. Maxim's report also sheds light on a tactic, a very insidious tactic, used by the Uzbek government.
Okay, what's that?
Blacklisting.
Blacklisting.
He explains how these blacklists are used to control people and silence dissent.
I see.
It's not as obvious as violence, but in some ways it's even worse. So these blacklists, think of them as like a modern-day scarlet letter.
Okay.
They can restrict people's travel,
Yeah.
stop them from getting jobs, education, even limit access to basic services.
Gosh, imagine being cut off from your community, not able to work or even get medical care.
Right, because you're on this list.
Yeah.
It's a way to make life unbearable for anyone who dares to challenge the government.
Chillingly effective.
It is, and they don't even have to resort to violence. They just cripple people's lives
Right.
through this bureaucracy, turning them into social pariahs.
Wow, and it's not just blacklists.
Right.
Maxim points out how widespread torture is in Uzbekistan.
It is.
It's used to extract confessions or punish dissent.
Sadly.
And what's really disturbing is that it's not just physical pain.
Right.
It's about breaking people psychologically, leaving them traumatized.
Long after those wounds heal.
Exactly. It's terrifying what people face in Uzbekistan.
It is.
You could be arrested, detained, tortured just for expressing your opinion.
Or going to a protest.
And this isn't hypothetical.
It's not. This is what the respondent went through.
That's what makes this report so powerful.
I agree.
Connecting these broader patterns of repression to the specific experiences of individuals,
Right.
showing it's not just an isolated incident.
It's
Part of a strategy
Right.
to silence dissent and maintain control.
Absolutely. And it brings us to a critical question. What happens to people like this respondent if they have to go back to Uzbekistan?
What are the risks?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a big question. Maxim's report is really clear about this. I mean, it lays out the very real danger that the respondent faces if he's sent back to Uzbekistan.
So not theoretical?
No, it's not just a theoretical risk. It's based on, his actions, what the government has done in the past, and how they're still harassing his family.
So it's not even just about what happened to him before.
No, it's about the danger he'd face if he went back.
And is that danger just like physical violence or going to prison?
Well, that is part of it, but it goes beyond that. You see, being blacklisted in Uzbekistan, it has these huge consequences.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about it before.
Right. It basically makes you a social pariah.
So even if he avoids being arrested or tortured,
Right.
it still sounds like life would be incredibly difficult.
Oh, he wouldn't be able to work, travel. He wouldn't even be able to access basic services like healthcare.
God.
And his family would probably keep getting harassed too.
It would be a life of constant fear then.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, based on all this, it seems like Maxim is making a strong case for why this man deserves asylum.
Oh, absolutely. And Maxim is an expert in asylum law, remember? So he lays out in detail how the respondent's case fits the criteria for asylum.
So he's really connecting the respondent's story to the actual legal requirements.
Exactly. He's not just telling a story, he's building a legal argument backed by evidence.
One thing that really struck me in the report was how much emphasis Maxim puts on the respondent's trauma.
Yes, he doesn't just mention it. He really digs into the effects of the beatings, the threats, the constant fear, how it's affected him physically and mentally.
And I guess a lot of people would just see that as a side story.
Maybe. But Maxim makes it clear that trauma is actually crucial evidence.
Oh, so?
Well, it supports the asylum claim because it shows the real harm he's suffered because of his activism.
It's a reminder that asylum isn't just about physical safety.
That's right. It's also about recognizing the lasting effects of trauma.
So Maxim is also saying that these psychological effects of persecution,
The anxiety, the fear, the nightmares,
they're real.
they are. They can be just as bad as physical injuries.
Now, Maxim doesn't just focus on the respondent's story, though, right?
No, he looks at the bigger picture of how repression works in Uzbekistan.
And how does that work?
Well, he says the government uses legal means to punish people.
Legal.
Well, seemingly legal, they use these vague charges like extremism or disrupting public order to silence critics.
That's a tactic we see in a lot of countries.
It is. They make these broad laws that can be used against anyone.
And then because the courts are controlled by the government.
There's no chance of a fair trial.
So the system is basically rigged.
Pretty much, but then it gets worse because you also have these things that happen outside the legal system.
Like what?
Things like torture or people disappearing or families getting harassed.
Those are terrifying.
They are, and because they happen in secret, it's even more frightening.
Maxim talks about this with the respondent, right?
Yes. Remember how his family was harassed even after he left?
Yeah, with the police searching their home and the summonses.
It's like they were trying to punish him through his family.
Even though he wasn't there.
Exactly. It shows how far a repressive government will go.
It's a disturbing picture of what life is like for people who speak out in Uzbekistan.
It is, and Maxime makes it clear that this isn't random or anything. It's a strategy to silence opposition.
A deliberate strategy.
Yes, and they'll use any means to do it. The legal system, violence going after families.
So this case, and what Maxime says about it, brings up questions about how the rest of the world can help protect human rights.
Especially in places like this where even running away doesn't mean you're safe.
Yeah, like when the respondent was detained in Turkey.
Yeah, that's really worrying. Even if it was temporary, it shows that even in countries thought to be safe,
Asylum seekers might be sent back.
it's a risk. So the question is, what can we do to protect people fleeing persecution?
That's a tough one. What do you think?
Well, I think it would take a lot of different things.
Like, what would that look like?
It's tough. I mean, it's a complex problem.
Right, and it feels like we've only just scratched the surface here. This respondent's story is just one example
One of many, sadly.
of so many people facing persecution in Uzbekistan and around the world.
Right.
It's a reminder of how fragile human rights are and how important it is to protect the people who are most vulnerable.
And it's not just about what happens inside a country.
No.
The Uzbek government's actions, they affect people in other countries too.
Right, it's like a ripple effect.
It is. They challenge international law and human rights.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It is from the laws about asylum to the politics between countries.
And trying to navigate all of that.
Especially for someone who's already been through so much.
Right, it's overwhelming.
It is. And Maxime really highlights how important expert reports are in these cases.
Yeah, because he's not just an academic, right?
No, he's worked on so many cases.
Over 100.
Yeah, over 100 with all these different law firms in the UK and the US.
And he's helped people win their asylum cases.
He has. His expertise helps to connect the individual's experience with the law.
So he's giving a voice to people who might not be heard otherwise.
Exactly. And his reports, they expose how these systems of oppression work. They help people understand what asylum seekers are going through.
That's powerful. Now I'm curious about international pressure. Can that actually change how a country like Uzbekistan treats its people?
That's a good question. It's complicated.
Right.
But I do think even repressive governments, they care about what other countries think.
Because they need things for other countries.
Exactly. They need trade, diplomacy, aid.
And if their human rights record is bad.
It can affect those things.
So it's not just about being morally outraged.
No, it's about using those relationships to push for change.
And it's not just governments that can do this, is it?
No, not at all. Groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are really important.
They document abuses and advocate for change.
They do. And individuals can help too.
How?
By raising awareness, supporting human rights groups, contacting their elected officials.
So it's about creating pressure from all sides.
Yes, from the ground up.
And I know it can feel overwhelming, like what can one person do?
Right, but every action matters.
Every voice.
Every single one. It all contributes to change.
Maxime's work is a perfect example of that. He's dedicated his career to fighting for justice.
And he's making a difference.
He is.
Yeah.
And he's showing others how to get involved too.
With his YouTube channel and his online portal.
So anyone listening who wants to learn more,
or take action,
those are good places to start.
They are, because even when things seem really bad,
there's always something we can do.
Always.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening.
It has.
We've seen the dark side of humanity and how these systems of oppression work.
But we've also seen the strength of the human spirit.
And how people fight for justice.
Even in the darkest times, there's always hope.
I love that. There's always a reason to keep fighting for a better world.
And remember, change takes time.
It does.
It's a long process, but every step we take,
every voice we raise,
brings us closer.
This case, Maxime's work, it's a reminder that we can't just sit back.
We have to speak out against injustice.
Support those who are struggling.
And work towards a world where everyone's rights are protected.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We hope you learned something.
And that you'll continue to explore these issues and find your own ways to make a difference.
We can all do our part.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening.